Hey everyone, this is Dr. Drizzle, and welcome to the National Parks Expedition Challenge. El Morro National Monument in western New Mexico is like a giant outdoor history book. This huge sandstone cliff stands 200 feet tall, towering over the desert around it. For hundreds of years, people have been coming to this special place, drawn by a freshwater pool at the base of the cliff, something very important in the dry desert. When you visit, you can walk along trails, see the amazing carvings up close, and imagine what life was like for the travelers who stopped here so many years ago. And now, let's meet our rock star ranger, Shannon. Ranger Shannon, thank you so much for having us here today. This is a beautiful place and it's snowing outside. So excited. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm from Virginia, so I'm from the beach area, and I used to be a teacher, and I taught for 3 years in high school, and then I got a job at Voyageurs National Park to be the education specialist there. So I just spent my summer, I went up there, and the first job I applied to in June, my roommate sent this to me. She said, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this." So I applied in June, and then I got the job here to continue doing education for National Park. So I'm here for 2 years.
So we know that this place has been a stopover for travelers along the years. Tell us about this place and what is the significance of El Morro?
Yeah, for thousands of years, this place used to be a spot where it was known to have water. So behind us here, you can see there's a pool, and we are in the desert. So for thousands of years, people knew that this was a spot to get water. And that's part of why there's inscriptions here on the rock, and what makes it special is that sometimes the inscriptions are letting people know this is the spot where the water is.
Well, it's sort of like at a hotel when you sometimes sign a book, or at a wedding you sign a travel book. People inscribed their names here. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But there's some natural features here that are really amazing. I mean, they're huge. So tell us about this bluff and what it's made out of.
Yeah, this is sandstone. It is mostly Zuni sandstone, so it's from the Jurassic era. And then you might be able to see on the top, it's a little bit of a different color, that's Dakota sandstone. It's going to be from the Cretaceous area. But a long time ago, millions of years, this used to be a big sand dune. And then there was an ocean over top of it, a sea that went right across North America. And so we are kind of in the shallow part of that ocean. And so over time, as that ocean went away and the sandstone remained, and there's this clay called kaolinite that holds those little grains of sand together and creates this sandstone. And so this is called a cuesta, which means a cuesta has a gentle slope on one side and a really steep drop on the other side. So here we're kind of getting into closer to the side where the steep drop is. And this area here, you can see where the erosion is happening, where the water is staining the sandstone. It's just a natural way for the water to collect down into this pool.
Now, the water that is collecting here or coming down this cliff is coming from rain and snow?
Yeah, we get a lot of snow here in the winter, actually, which is surprising for a desert. So we get a lot of snow, and then we actually have to close the trail up there because there's so much snow. And then once the spring comes, and it's really not until mid-May that it starts to melt. And it'll slowly start to melt, and it'll come down and continue to replenish the pool. And it also kind of has a bit of an overhang, which protects it from the sunlight. So the sun has a harder time hitting the water, which keeps it from evaporating.
And I'm guessing also it keeps it from a lot of different things growing, organisms that would grow in there and make it not as clear. Now, you said that in the 1940s, maybe there was a rock slide here. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you might be able to see right here, there is a boulder. When we were part of the National Park Service, but really early on in the 40s, our chief ranger came out and saw a huge pile of rocks where the pool was. So it took a really long time. They don't have the technology that we have today, but they cleared out the rocks and they reinforced the pool with concrete. So that way we know from here on, we will always have water in the pool. But when travelers were here in the 1500s and beforehand, it was not full of concrete.
Well, it looks very inviting, but I notice you have up some split rail fences and there's some signs along the way, and it also says we're not supposed to climb or deface these rocks. So I'm assuming this is off limits for visitors. We can't swim in here.
Absolutely. Water is precious here in the desert, so this is a very fragile ecosystem. It's easy for us to come in and introduce things that shouldn't be in there or to harm species. As you can see, we have cattails. You usually would never find cattails in the desert.
Now, are these cattails native
Mhm.
to here? Which is very interesting because in some of our other parks, the cattails are invasive. So they're sort of smothering out all of the native plants, but here they belong.
Yeah, we're not doing anything to mitigate them growing. They seem to be doing really well, and we just kind of let them be.
I love that. Now, there is a fun story about this place before we start talking about the inscriptions and our challenge for today. Am I correct that there were camels here? And if so, tell us about the camels here in New Mexico.
Absolutely. So in the 1800s, before the Civil War, after the Mexican-American War, the United States got New Mexico and Arizona and other parts of the Southwest as territories from the war. So then the government was faced with this issue of how do we get across all of this desert, so much desert, and they wanted to get to California for all the gold. So they played around with a lot of different ideas, and one of those ideas was to get camels. Camels love the desert. So a group of men in the army went out to the Mediterranean and they sailed all around and they got a bunch of different types of camels. There are two-humped camels, there are one-humped camels, they got camels that love the winter, they got camels that love the heat, all different types to bring them out here for an experiment to see if it would work. So they brought them to Texas and they marched the camels all the way through Texas, up New Mexico and across from Albuquerque, which is today I-25 and then Route 66 or I-40. And they marched them, they stopped here at El Morro, just like all the travelers before, for water. And the camels did really well out here. The camels love the trees. They, don't need a lot of water, but they love to eat the cacti out here, and they did really well. After the Civil War, the Camel Corps kind of dissipated. It was no longer needed. And then they built a railroad. So the question of how do we get across the desert, that was answered with trains. It's a lot easier than camels. To commemorate this, every 2 years, we have a really cool guy named Doug bring his camels, and he brings them here, and so we get to see what the park would have looked like with camels in it again.
I love that. And I think you would have looked good on a camel traveling these trails.
Thank you.
So sorry they're not here anymore. So far we've talked about this beautiful pool of water, the sandstone cliffs, the way the erosion is carving out these areas, the way we're protecting this water. You've got cattails here, but we also mentioned something very important to this place, and I guess one of the reasons we call it a national monument is we have something called inscriptions on these rocks. Let's talk about those inscriptions.
Yeah, we have petroglyphs and we have inscriptions here. So the sandstone, because it is just tiny little bits of sand held together by clay, it's really weak. It's easy to carve into. Since people have always been coming here for water, since the sandstone is really easy to mark, it's become a popular spot for thousands of years for people to come and inscribe their names. Sometimes it's messages about what's out here or where the next water source is. Sometimes it's just to say, I was here and this is what I did. So in about a half-mile stretch here, we have over 2,000 inscriptions. And we can't tell the stories of all 2,000 people, but we have a mix of petroglyphs. A lot of them are ancestral Zuni petroglyphs, and we don't know what they mean today. We know what some of them mean, but not most of them. We have Spanish conquistadors, 2 governors of the colony of New Spain are etched into the walls here. And we have Americans who are homesteading out to California that stopped here. And then we have a lot of railroad guys that were here. And of course, we have our Camel Corps people. They also etch their names into the rock.
Can you tell us a story about a particular inscription?
One of my favorites is the Sarah Fox inscription. So her name is Sally, but she put Sarah, her formal name, onto the rock, and she was 12 years old. She and her family were heading out west to California to go homestead, and they stopped here for water, and she carved her name into the rock. Pretty soon after she left El Morro, she got shot by an arrow, but she survived and she made it to California.
but we have her, we know she was here because of that inscription. So that makes me think these inscriptions are extremely important. But just like the water carves out this rock, do you have issues with weather and erosion of these inscriptions?
Absolutely. Weathering and erosion is a huge threat to our inscriptions, and there's nothing we can really truly do to stop natural forces. Some other threats that we have are lichen. Lichen is a little cluster of bacteria and algae, and they will eat rock. For being such a small organism, they can eat something as strong as a rock, and they are eating away at our inscription. But again, they're natural, so there's not a lot we can do. But what we can stop is there are people who do like to carve over top of our inscriptions. There's one that we have left here, hot rod, right across the rock.
Hot rod, which really doesn't tell a story of the history of this place. Now, let's be clear, this is against the law. This is a federally protected place, so we are not allowed to write our name into a rock. In fact, we would probably call that graffiti, graffiti that is damaging or taking the place of this historical graffiti that told a story. Now, what I love about this is we probably could go and find every one of these inscriptions and maybe even build them into a timeline. So the story of El Morro is written in these rocks. The sad part is the humans of today are not doing a good job to protect those. So I know some kids that might want to do that. So kids, we're going to be using UN Global Goal number 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. And it's all about caring about our resources that are already here that tell stories. So we want you to think about the inscriptions that are carved into these beautiful sandstone cliffs. We want you to think about how important those stories are. And if Sally Fox had not put her name there, we would not have known her story. So it's important, just like a book, that we're not going to tear up a book or rip a book apart, that we keep these stories alive. So we want you to think about, how can we protect these inscriptions? So we can't do a lot about weather and erosion, and we really don't want to mess with the lichen who were here first, right? But we can do something to encourage people to be good humans and not to inscribe their names or write over their names like the one person did. So we want you to think about how you would protect them, whether that is coming up with ways to actually cover the rock, whether it comes through you creating public service announcements or creating wayside signs, whatever you can think of, because Ranger Shannon and her team here are very passionate about these stories staying here. So once you come up with your great ideas, we want you to share them with your teachers and on social media. You can see on the screen now the different hashtags that you can use and the places that you can tag so that the park knows that you care about this place. Ranger Shannon, I'd like to talk just a little bit about where we are now, this ancestral land. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, El Morro is a really important place for the Zuni Pueblo. This is an ancestral home of the Zuni Pueblo. On top of this cuesta is where they had built Atsana, which they left around the 1200s. Today, modern Zuni Pueblo is about 30 miles from here.
So not only is it important to the park, it's important to the Zuni Pueblo that we protect this place. And it's just part of our spirit that we need to do this. It is not something we need to come in and destroy. I feel like these kids are going to come up with some great ideas here. Shannon, there might be some students sitting in their classroom right now that are interested in becoming part of the Park Service or working with public lands. Can you look into the middle camera and give us a little bit of advice to those students?
Yeah, one thing I thought is that you had to study science to work for the Park Service, but that's not true. You can study whatever you're passionate about, and there's a place for you in the Park Service. I studied history because I love history, and I was able to find a home here. So whatever is passionate or what you're passionate about and skills that you have, there is a place for that. So I would say just go all in with what you care about, and surely you'll find a spot. And don't be afraid to look around you. There's a lot of small national park sites that maybe you don't realize are right outside your door.
I love that. In fact, as of this filming, there's 431 national park sites, and some of them you have to travel to. I mean, you have to go pretty far out of your way to get there, but if you don't, you'll miss something, especially this place, El Morro. Now, I had to pull up this snowball here because a lot of our kids that are watching in the South do not see snow. So I'm going to throw it at the screen. Oh, I did really good there. Excellent. But you don't like snow too much. In fact, you called yourself a reptile. You like to be just really, really hot, but you came here and there's some snow here, but you still love it,
I
right?
do still love it. I did not realize we got snow in the desert, but we are a high desert.
High
We are
desert,
really high in elevation.
which reminds me a little bit of Bryce Canyon, which is beautiful and sunny and hot and humid in the summertime, but gets a lot of snow in the wintertime. Shannon, thank you so much for letting us come here today. So let's recap. El Morro National Monument, sandstone cliffs, land of ancestral Zuni Pueblo. We have erosion here. This pool is protected by concrete when we had a rock slide. We have inscriptions, over 2,000 inscriptions, stories that are told in these rocks. Sarah Fox is one of these stories, a 12-year-old, probably some of the same ages as our kids that are watching. And there were camels here. So don't forget to share your ideas with us and Ranger Shannon and the park. So on behalf of El Morro National Monument, Ranger Shannon and myself, we are out of here. Have a great day, everyone.